Over the past few years, we've been seeing so much nonsense, so many lies dressed up as virtue, modern day blood libels. Calling Israel's righteous self-defense a genocide is a modern day blood libel. And many people are bemused, they're confused, they're wondering why isn't logic winning the day. And I wanted to share with you a brilliant Torah insight that I learned just the other day that I think can hopefully, for all of us, shed some light and encouragement. Because when you're constantly trying to explain the truth, both the factual truth and the moral truth, and it seems there are some people in the media, in the elites, the anti-Israel brigade, that simply will not see the facts, you can end up feeling like you're just hitting your head against a brick wall, that you're talking to a brick wall. So how can we get our head around this idea that there are these slanderous, libelous accusations thrown at the Jews? And we've had that throughout our history, but today it is centered and heightened all around our right to the land of Israel as our rightful inheritance, as our right to be there. And the people who are against us are saying, no. And the people who are attacking Israel have every right to do what they're doing. It's all resistance because it's a just cause. How do we get our head around dealing with all these slander and lies? Here's a fascinating idea that I learned. So, the spiritual forefather, and in potentially in many ways the biological forefather of the Arabs, of the Arab people, the Arab world, and the Muslim world, is Ishmael. Both Jews, Torah-believing Jews, and Muslims believe this. Muslims actually say, it says in the Quran, that it was Ishmael that was bound up on the altar in the Akedah, where God said to sacrifice your son. Jews and Christians that believe the Torah is the word of God say that it was Isaac. But they believe it's Ishmael. Now, we actually did on JTV a whole documentary about Ishmael and prophecy, which if you haven't already seen it, it's highly, highly worth watching. In fact, if you just search on JTV, on YouTube, Prophecy Ishmael JTV, and you get this one, Ancient Torah Prophecy on Radical Islam's Emergence Revealed, the Ishmaelite Exile, strongly recommend that you check that out because it shares with you a lot of Torah insights. But I want to share with you one specific one, centered around this point about the lies and the slander and how we address it. Because it turns out, as always is the case, the Torah told us about this long ago, and it tells us about Ishmael. Now, at the beginning of the Torah reading of Toldos, Genesis 25:19, it says, it's talking about, every so often the Torah does this, it goes through the generations and lists the progeny, often from Adam to Noah to Abraham. Now we're talking about Abraham's descendants. And it says, and these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. And then it says Abraham begot Isaac, right? So it's beginning to tell us about the descendants of Abraham. Now the second part of that sentence seems redundant. Abraham begot Isaac. Well, you just told us, and these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. The Torah is almost reinforcing the fact, repeating the fact that Isaac is the son of Abraham. Why? Well, one of the reasons is this. Don't forget that Isaac was Abraham's second child. His first child was not with his wife Sarah, but with Hagar, his maidservant, because he thought that he simply was not able to have a child with Sarah because she was so infertile. The Talmud even says she didn't have a womb. And so he has relations with Hagar and produces Ishmael. But when Ishmael is 13 years old, he finally has Isaac. It's a miracle. Now, from Ishmael's perspective, he doesn't like this because now there's a whole question mark about the inheritance. And it turns out that while Ishmael is absolutely blessed, and God says this, that he's going to bless Ishmael with, nations will come from him, and he will have a great his nation people will have a great future. In terms of Abraham's specific mission, that is going to be going to the child of Abraham and Sarah. It's going to be going to Isaac, which then goes on to Jacob and then produces the Jewish people. And that leads to the inheritance of the land of Israel. And God confirms this very specifically, very explicitly. But Yishmael does not like this. He does not like the fact that the inheritance, particularly not just it's with regard to the land of Israel, but in every aspect of this specific Abrahamic mission. He does not like that. And so what does he do? Well, Abraham, and Sarah host a feast to celebrate their child, Isaac, when Isaac turns 2 years old. And just before Isaac was born, Abraham, and Sarah go and visit this king called Avimelech. And Abraham, because he's fearful that someone will try to kill him, maybe Avimelech will try to kill him, this king, because Sarah was so beautiful, he says, and so he can take Sarah for himself. He says, I'm just going to say that we are siblings, because then they won't try and kill me. And as expected, Avimelech takes Sarah. He doesn't sleep with her because God warns him not to do this. In a dream, God speaks to him and he gives Sarah back to Abraham. But the scoffers of the generation, including Ishmael, we're told by some of the Torah commentators, they try to suggest that Isaac really was the child of King Avimelech and Sarah. So the timing, you could kind of make the case for, because it happened just before Isaac came into the world. Now, this leads us on to what I was asking about earlier. Why is the Torah reinforcing that Isaac was indeed the child of Abraham and Sarah? Because the scoffers of the generation were trying to suggest, no, it's not really descendant of Abraham and Isaac. It's Avimelech and Sarah's child. And it'd be quite easy to make this case because they'd been infertile for so long. Because Abraham and Sarah were so old. Still a bit challenging though, isn't it? Because Sarah was the one that we're told didn't have a womb. And Sarah was the one who was apparently infertile, which is why Abraham was able to have a child with Hagar. But nonetheless, scoffers aren't really interested in the facts. They just want to scoff. And it turns out that one of the chief scoffers that was pushing this into people's ears was Ishmael. At the party, he was telling people, you really think this is the child of Abraham and Sarah? No. This is not a legitimate son. And he told that to people. And that's why we're also told that at this point, when Isaac was 2, God made it that Isaac looked exactly like Abraham. So there'd be no doubt. He both writes it explicitly and repeats the point in the Torah because of the scoffers. That's one. Obviously, by the way, there's hundreds of readings and understandings of every single verse in the Torah. That's one idea. But also, he made Isaac look like Abraham. So there could be no doubt, no question. And for those who may say, maybe Ishmael wasn't so sure. Maybe he wondered and doubted. Well, it turns out the Torah commentaries tell us that when the angel came to visit Sarah and tell her and Abraham that they were going to have a child, Ishmael was there. He was present at the time. So he knew full well what was going on. But he simply didn't like it. He didn't like the one that would be inheriting Abraham's specific mission here. And so therefore, he scoffed, therefore, he lied. Now, why am I telling you this? Because I'm afraid to say that as problematic as it is, but also as remarkable as it is, the truth is that this prototype has not changed throughout the generations. And we're seeing it come to the fore again now. And what is that? That the scoffers are not interested in the truth. The people who are trying to say, the Jews, you have no right to the land, you have no right to be here. They may know full well what the reality is, but they're not actually interested in hearing the truth. They simply don't like it. And therefore, getting so tired and worked up by the fact that we're trying to explain that Israel is rightfully the Jewish people's, that Isaac is the heir to Abraham and is the progeny of Abraham and Sarah. If someone is a scoffer, if someone does not want to hear, they're not going to hear it, no matter how clear the truth is to them. This is not to say that we don't make Israel's case when dealing with scoffers, but that's in order to be able to answer the scoffer to someone who's genuinely interested in hearing the truth. But for someone who doesn't want to hear the truth, well, don't expect them to suddenly turn around and recognize it and acknowledge it. For them, it's something emotional. Now, by the way, it happens to be that we should try to deal with anti-Semitism at an emotional level too. And we should try and figure out tools and ways of dealing with the emotions of resentment, jealousy, whatever it is that fuels the Ishmaelite hostility. But let's not forget that when we're focused on the facts, that we shouldn't be intimidated by the scoffing and the lies, because it's not coming from a place of genuine concern for facts. So what is the solution ultimately? Yeah, we can respond to the scoffing, but that doesn't deal with the root cause. Well, I think about the fact that what was God's solution? He made Isaac look like Abraham, so there could be absolutely no doubt. So what I take from that is that what has to be our solution, our ultimate answer to these accusations and lies and libels about us today, we as a Jewish people should look like the progeny of Abraham. We should speak like the progeny of Abraham. We should justify our right to be in the land and our place there as being justified by our covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's how we need to justify ourselves. That's how we need to identify, speak, and act. Not through justifying ourselves via international law, by being a democracy, by even the right to self-determination, but by our divine right, divine mission. That's the only thing that the world's going to hear. That's the only thing, by the way, that the Muslim and Arab world will ultimately be able to hear. They have an emotional issue with it. But you don't deal with the emotional issue by constantly being on the defensive, by replying to the scoffers in a defensive mode. You do it by holding your ground, by stating the truth calmly and firmly, as a parent would do to a child that's having a tantrum. You don't legitimize rubbish. You state it firmly. And if people have emotional issues, well, that's something that they need to deal with. But you don't deal with it by hiding away from the truth, by shirking the truth. The more confident and firm we are, the more likely we are to see a shift. And indeed, we know that at the end of Ishmael's life, he does repent. And we're told by the Torah commentators that the reason he repented, returned to God, returned to a good life, moral life, it was a two-pronged approach. The first was the truth became undeniable. He thought he would be the only heir. Now he could see that the hand of God was so clearly in Isaac's life that it became undeniable. The truth held firm. The second part was that he saw that Abraham, still loved him, still cared for him, still saw him as valuable, a part of the story of his family and of human history. And once he could see that his father still loved him despite the fact that he was exiled, his resentment softened into a desire to reconnect with his family's values. Now, the fact that he was exiled was a bit of a complicated part of the story that God himself mandated because of the concerns around Ishmael's behavior towards Isaac. We're told that Ishmael was really trying to aggrieve Isaac, basically. First of all, he challenged Isaac's legitimacy. Secondly, there was the spiritual threat because he was engaging in all kinds of immoral practices, from idolatry to immorality to even murder, attempting to kill Isaac. And the concern was around the influence of Isaac that Ishmael could achieve, which could be dangerous to the future of the Jewish people at such an important foundational moment. But the point is that Ishmael, through a combination of recognizing the truth and realizing that he still had a place, and he was not rejected, but he needs to think about his own behavior in order to play a role in this unfolding epic global destiny of Abraham's descendants. Once he realized that, then it all changed. So, as Rabbi Sachs actually said in his book, Not in God's Name, talking about Islamic extremism, he said one of the important points to recognize is that chosen does not mean someone else is rejected. That a specific mission for the Jewish people, which Isaac inherits, does not mean that if someone else doesn't have that they're rejected by God. It means that they have a different mission. It means that they might not need to be observing all the 613 commandments in the land of Israel, but they still have all kinds of other commandments. They have other ways in which they're meant to collaborate in this divine plan. So that has to be the way that this whole solution will come about. There needs to be uncompromising telling of truth, and emotionally for people that don't like this, for them to come to terms with the fact that they may not have the role that they're yearning for and craving, but they do have a role that only they can fulfill. The truth is that in the future, one day, the descendants of Israel and the descendants of Ishmael are destined to be best of friends and work together in divine service. They're already, the Arab world is already so oriented towards connection to God and spirituality and prayer. It's even in the name of Ishmael, God will hear, which means God hears their prayers. And they're situated geographically right next to the land of Israel. So the future, without a doubt, is going to be bright. But the message of this video is to remember that we shouldn't be so intimidated by all this scoffing, because it's not based in facts. It's based in emotions. So the answer has to be not to try and hope that we'll turn them around through facts, but through looking like the descendants of Abraham. Just quickly, we've all heard of heaven, hell, and the afterlife, and at some point I'm sure you've given it some thought. But the Jewish view is radically different from almost everything you've been taught, and once you hear it, it will change how you understand life itself. Have a watch of the trailer for our new JTV Plus documentary called Heaven, Hell, and the Afterlife, and you can watch the full film right now by clicking the link below in the video description. Across the world, the afterlife is described in simple terms. Heaven above, hell below, the devil waiting to tempt you, and a humanity born in original sin. But Judaism tells a story that is older, deeper, and far more hopeful. Less obsessed with fear and more rooted in purpose. A story where the soul is not born guilty, but born noble. Where the body is not the enemy, but the partner. where the devil isn't God's rival, but his assistant, because Judaism has no second power, where hell exists, but not forever, where heaven exists, but not as the final destination, and where the real end of the human story is resurrection, not escape. Judaism views history as a mission, not a mistake. Other civilizations teach that we are here to earn our way into heaven. Judaism teaches that we are here to bring heaven down to earth. And to understand what happens after we die, we first have to understand why we're here in the first place. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to reveal the Jewish vision of life after death. One of the most misunderstood ideas, but if understood correctly, can transform your very understanding of life itself. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.